The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, each drop racing down the glass like tears I'd cried so many times before. I stood there, my reflection barely visible in the storm's chaos, and I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. My life had always been a storm, chaotic, unpredictable, and lonely. I'm Elena Hartwell, though most people at Ashford Industries just called me that girl from accounting. 26 years old, plain as a sparrow in a world full of peacocks. With mousy brown hair I kept in a perpetual bun and glasses that seemed determined to slide down my nose at the most inconvenient moments. My mother used to say I had a face only a mother could love, and after she passed, I wasn't even sure about that anymore. The invitation in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing that screamed wealth and privilege, everything I wasn't. Mr. Alexander Thorne requests your presence at the annual Ashford Industries Gala. Except this wasn't really a request, was it? When the CEO of the company you work for summons you, it's a command wrapped in polite paper. I'd only seen Alexander Thorne 3 times in the 2 years I'd worked at Ashford. Each time he'd swept through the office like a force of nature. 6'3" of perfectly tailored suits, dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to look right through you. The first time I saw him, I'd been carrying a stack of files and quite literally ran into him. Papers went everywhere, my coffee decorated his $1,000 shoes, and I'd wanted to die right there on the marble floor. He'd looked at me then, really looked, and I'd felt naked under that gaze. Not in a romantic way, in a terrifying, soul-exposing way. He'd said nothing, just handed me a file that had landed near his feet and walked away. But something in that moment had changed. I felt it, though I couldn't name it. Now, standing in my cramped studio apartment with its peeling wallpaper and the neighbor's music bleeding through the walls, I tried to imagine what he could possibly want with me. Elena Hartwell, the invisible girl. The one people looked past, never at. 3 days later, I stood in front of my closet, which was more of a suggestion of a closet, staring at the exactly 2 dresses I owned. One was black and funeral appropriate. The other was a navy blue my college roommate had forced me to buy 6 years ago, insisting I'd need it someday. Today was apparently that day. It didn't fit quite right, too tight in the shoulders, too loose in the waist, but it would have to do. I couldn't afford anything else, not with my student loans and the medical bills from my mother's final month still crushing me. The gala was being held at the Plaza Hotel. Of course it was. Where else would people like Alexander Thorne celebrate? I took the subway, emerging into the glittering chaos of Fifth Avenue feeling like a fish that had accidentally flopped onto land. The hotel entrance was a river of designer gowns and tuxedos, of diamonds catching the light and laughter that sounded effortless and practiced. I almost turned around, almost went back down those subway steps and disappeared into my small, safe life. But something pushed me forward, maybe curiosity, maybe the fear of what would happen if I disobeyed a direct summons from the CEO. Either way, I found myself climbing those iconic steps, handing my invitation to a doorman who looked at me like I'd tracked mud onto his pristine carpet. The ballroom was something out of a fairy tale, the kind of fairy tale where the heroine doesn't belong. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto floors so polished you could see your reflection. Everywhere I looked, beautiful people clustered in beautiful groups, drinking champagne that probably cost more than my monthly rent and discussing things I couldn't begin to understand. I found a corner near the hors d'oeuvres table and tried to become invisible. I'd always been good at that. Years of being the ugly duckling had taught me how to fold into spaces, how to make myself small and unnoticeable. I was so focused on my disappearing act that I didn't notice him approaching until he was right there, his presence commanding enough to make the air feel different. "Miss Hartwell." Alexander Thorne's voice was exactly what you'd expect from a man who owned half of Manhattan, smooth, confident, with an edge that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "You came." I nearly dropped the tiny quiche I'd been nervously holding. Up close, he was even more intimidating than I remembered. Not just handsome, though he was devastatingly so, but powerful. It radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Mr. Thorne," I managed, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Yes, the invitation said, walk with me." It wasn't a question. He was already moving, and some instinct made me follow, weaving through the crowd that seemed to part for him like he was Moses and they were the Red Sea. We ended up on a balcony overlooking Central Park, the night air cool against my flushed cheeks. The city sprawled below us, a glittering testament to human ambition and dreams. I felt dizzy, though whether from the height or his proximity I couldn't say. "I need you to marry me." He said it the same way someone might say nice weather we're having, casual and matter of fact, as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in my brain. I actually laughed. It was either that or pass out. I'm sorry, what? Marry me? I need a wife and you need. He gestured vaguely at me, and I felt every insecurity I'd ever had rise up and strangle me. You need what I can offer. The words were like a slap. What exactly are you suggesting I need, and why on earth would you? I couldn't even finish the sentence. The absurdity was too much. He turned to face me fully then, and in the moonlight, I could see something in his expression I couldn't quite read. I'll be direct, Miss Hartwell. My grandfather, who controls the family trust and has a significant say in company matters, has given me an ultimatum. Marry within 3 months, or he begins the process of transferring control to my cousin Marcus, a man who would run Ashford Industries into the ground within a year. And you chose me because… I still couldn't wrap my mind around this. Because you're perfect for my purposes. You're plain, he said it without malice, but it still cut, quiet, unambitious. You won't draw attention or try to leverage this for social climbing. You work in accounting, so you understand the importance of discretion. Most importantly, you have significant debt that I've researched thoroughly. Medical bills from your mother's cancer treatment, student loans, credit card debt from trying to keep your head above water. He'd investigated me. Somehow that was more shocking than the proposal itself. I felt violated, exposed, angry in a way I rarely let myself feel. You think you can just buy me, not buy, offer a mutually beneficial arrangement. He pulled a folder from inside his jacket who brings contracts to a gala and handed it to me. I'll pay off every cent of your debt. You'll move into my penthouse, attend necessary social functions as my wife, and in return you'll have financial security you've never known. After 2 years we divorce quietly and you'll receive a settlement of $5 million. $5 million. The number was so absurd it didn't feel real. That kind of money would mean freedom I'd never imagined. No more choosing between groceries and electricity. No more waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic about bills. No more feeling like I was drowning slowly in a sea of debt I'd never escape. But this wasn't a business deal. This was my life, my dignity, what was left of my self-respect. No, the word came out stronger than I expected. I'm not some transaction you can negotiate, Mr. Thorne. Find someone else to be your convenient, forgettable wife. I turned to leave, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I'd made it maybe 3 steps when his voice stopped me. Your landlord filed eviction papers yesterday. You have 30 days. I froze. He continued, relentless. Your car is 1 payment from repossession. You've been taking extra shifts, but it's not enough, is it? It'll never be enough. How long can you keep this up, Elena? The use of my first name felt intimate and invasive all at once. I turned back slowly, and for the first time I saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Was it pity, concern? I couldn't tell, and that made it worse. I'm offering you a way out, he said, quieter now. 2 years of playing a role and then freedom, real freedom, or you can walk away and keep drowning, it's your choice. But it wasn't really a choice, was it? When someone's offering you a lifeboat and you're already underwater, you don't get to be proud about which hand pulls you up. I thought about my apartment, where the heat barely worked and I could hear every footstep from the unit above. About the calls from collection agencies I'd stopped answering because what was the point? About the dreams I'd had once, traveling, maybe going back to school, having a life that was more than just survival. Why me? I asked again because I needed to understand. There have to be hundreds of women who jump at this. Beautiful women, sophisticated women, why pick someone like me? Something flickered across his face there and gone so fast I almost missed it. Because you're real, Elena. Everyone in my world is playing a game, angling for something, pretending to be what they think I want. You're just trying to survive. That's honest. That's rare. It was possibly the saddest compliment I'd ever received. But standing there on that balcony with the city lights glittering below like fallen stars, I realized he was right. I was drowning, and pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. If I agree, my voice shook, this is purely a business arrangement. Separate bedrooms, no, expectations beyond what's necessary for appearances. Of course. He nodded, crisp and professional, and I tried not to feel pathetic about the relief that flooded through me. I'll have the contracts drawn up. We'll marry quietly next week. My attorney will handle everything. And just like that, my life changed. Just like that, I agreed to marry a stranger. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect from a business transaction dressed up as a ceremony. Cold, efficient, devoid of anything resembling joy. We stood in a judge's chambers, fluorescent lights humming overhead, while a bored-looking official read through the legal requirements. Alexander wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. I wore the same navy dress from the gala, because why spend money on a wedding dress for a wedding that wasn't real? His assistant, Caroline, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, served as witness along with his lawyer, a man named Richard who'd made me sign so many documents my hand cramped. Prenuptial agreements, non-disclosure agreements, contracts outlining every aspect of our arrangement. It was romance at its finest. "You may kiss the bride," the judge said, sounding like he'd rather be anywhere else. Alexander leaned in perfunctorily, his lips brushing my cheek so briefly I barely felt it. No warmth, no tenderness, just the checking of a box. "There," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "Not so bad, was it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because actually it was worse than I'd imagined. This coldness, this absolute absence of feeling, it made the whole thing feel more real and less real simultaneously. I was married. To a man who saw me as a problem solved, a role filled, a means to an end. The penthouse was obscene. That was the only word for it. 23 floors above the city, glass walls that made you feel like you were floating in the sky, furniture that probably had provenance dating back centuries. My entire apartment could have fit in the entrance hall. "Your rooms are through there," Alexander said, gesturing down a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. "The master suite is mine. You'll have the guest wing, bedroom, bathroom, sitting room, office space if you need it. Caroline has already had your things moved from your apartment." My things. 2 suitcases worth of clothes, some books, the photo albums I couldn't bear to part with. They'd probably gotten lost in a closet somewhere in this marble mausoleum. "The staff knows you're my wife," he continued, already checking his phone, already mentally moving on to the next item on his agenda. "Chef will prepare meals. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 8 when I'm home. If you need anything, speak to Caroline, she'll coordinate." "Where will you be?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He looked up, eyebrows raised slightly. "Working. I spend most evenings at the office. You'll have the place largely to yourself." A pause, then, almost as an afterthought, "Unless there's an event we need to attend together. Caroline will keep you informed." And then he was gone, the door to his private wing closing with a definitive click that seemed to say, "This far, no further." We might share a last name and an address, but that was where our marriage ended. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt crushingly, devastatingly lonely. The guest wing, my wing, was beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, untouchable, cold. The bedroom had a bed so large I felt like a child in it, dressed in linens with a thread count I didn't know existed. The bathroom was all marble and gold fixtures, a soaking tub that could fit 3 people, a shower with so many nozzles I couldn't figure out how to turn it on without accidentally creating a tsunami. I sat on the edge of that enormous bed and finally let myself cry. Not pretty tears, the ugly, gasping kind that make your whole body shake. I cried for my mother, who'd raised me alone and died convinced I'd never find happiness. I cried for the girl I'd been, who'd dreamed of a different life than this golden cage. I cried because I'd just married a man who couldn't even pretend to care, and some stupid part of me, the part that still believed in fairy tales despite everything, was heartbroken about it. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, scraped out, but also strangely resolved. This was my life now. I could either spiral into despair or I could make the best of this bizarre situation. At least my debt was gone. At least I could breathe financially for the first time in years. That had to count for something. Days bled into weeks, and I learned the rhythm of my new, strange existence. Alexander left before I woke and returned after I'd gone to bed. We were like ghosts haunting the same space, never quite occupying it simultaneously. On the rare occasions we crossed paths in the kitchen, in the hallway, he'd nod politely, ask if I was settling in well in that impersonal tone, and disappear again before I could formulate an answer. Caroline became my lifeline to the outside world, though lifeline might be generous. She was professional to a fault, never warm but never cruel, simply efficient. She coordinated my schedule, spa appointments I hadn't asked for, personal training sessions with a woman named Svetlana who seemed determined to kill me through Pilates, etiquette coaching with a stern French woman who made me practice walking with books on my head like it was 1952. "Mrs. Thorne," Madame Dubois would say, her accent thick with disapproval, "you must glide, not lumber. Your posture speaks of your breeding." My breeding was a single mother in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, working double shifts at a diner to keep the lights on. I wanted to tell Madame Dubois that, wanted to see her perfectly made-up face react to my reality. But I didn't. I just balanced another book on my head and tried to glide. The worst part was the makeover. I'd known it was coming. Caroline had scheduled it with the efficiency of a military operation. But I wasn't prepared for how it would feel to have a team of people descend on you with the explicit purpose of making you look less like yourself. The stylist Marco circled me like a shark scenting blood. "Oh honey," he'd said, and I couldn't tell if it was sympathy or horror in his voice. "We have so much work to do." 6 hours later, I barely recognized my reflection. My hair, freed from its perpetual bun, had been cut into long, soft layers that framed my face in waves I didn't know it could hold. The color was richer, deeper, with highlights that caught the light. The esthetician had shaped my eyebrows, done something to my skin that made it glow. The makeup artist had taught me tricks to make my eyes look larger, my cheekbones more defined. "See," Marco had said triumphantly, "you're not ugly. You just never learned how to work with what you have." I stared at the stranger in the mirror, still me, but a version I'd never known existed. Was this who I could have been all along? Or was this just another mask, another role I was playing in this elaborate performance? The clothes came next. Caroline took me to boutiques I'd only ever walked past, where salespeople looked at me with barely concealed confusion until she dropped Alexander's name. Then suddenly I was ushered into private rooms, brought champagne I didn't drink, draped in fabrics that felt like whispers against my skin. "Mr. Thorne has an image to maintain," Caroline explained as I stood on a platform while a seamstress pinned a dress that cost more than my old car. "His wife should reflect his status. These aren't for you, they're for the role you're playing." Right, the role. I almost forgot this was all a performance. The first event we attended together as a married couple was a charity gala for childhood literacy, ironic, given that Alexander and I had barely exchanged 100 words since the wedding. He'd come to my room an hour before we needed to leave, knocking in that perfunctory way he had. I opened the door, and for the first time I saw something flicker in those cold blue eyes. Surprise, maybe. Recognition of the transformation his money had bought. "You look appropriate," he said finally, and I tried not to let it sting. What had I expected? Some Hollywood moment where he tells me I'm beautiful? This was Alexander Thorne. Warmth wasn't in his vocabulary. The dress Caroline had selected was deep emerald green, cut to skim my newly refined figure, with a neckline that was sophisticated without being revealing. The heels made me 3 inches taller and terrified I'd break an ankle. The jewelry, borrowed from some vault Alexander apparently owned, felt heavy and foreign against my skin. In the car, he briefed me like I was an employee preparing for a presentation. "We'll be photographed. Stay close to me. Smile, but don't speak unless spoken to directly. If anyone asks about our relationship, we met through the company and fell in love quickly. Romantic but vague. Can you manage that?" "I'm not an idiot," I said, sharper than I'd intended. "I can play the part." He looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. "No, you're not an idiot. I apologize if I implied otherwise." It was possibly the most human thing he'd said to me since this whole arrangement began. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just nodded and looked out the window as the city slid by. The gala was at the Museum of Modern Art, because of course it was, and it was a sea of Manhattan's elite. Old money, new money, political figures, celebrities. Everyone who was anyone, all gathered to pretend they cared about children reading while really they were there to see and be seen. Alexander's hand found the small of my back as we entered, and I fought not to flinch at the touch. It was for show, I reminded myself. Everything was for show. We were actors on a stage, and this was our performance. "Alexander, you dark horse, getting married without telling anyone?" A man with silver hair and a smile like a shark's approached us, hand extended. "And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Thorne." "Graham." Alexander's voice was cordial but cool. "Elena, this is Graham Westfield, CEO of Westfield Capital. Graham, my wife, Elena." "Charmed," Graham said, his eyes traveling over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You're not what I expected." "Oh," I managed, trying to remember Madame Dubois' lessons. "What were you expecting?" "Someone more, in Alexander's usual style, but I can see the appeal. There's something refreshing about." "If you'll excuse us," Alexander cut in smoothly, his hand tightening slightly at my back. "I see the mayor's wife. Elena's been wanting to discuss the literacy program with her." He steered me away, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. "Graham is a vulture," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "Stay away from him. In fact, if any man makes you uncomfortable, you come find me immediately." "Understood." I looked up at him, startled by what almost sounded like protectiveness, but his face was impassive again, the mask firmly back in place. Maybe I'd imagined it. The evening became a blur of introductions and small talk, of champagne I barely touched and hors d'oeuvres I was too nervous to eat. Everyone wanted to know about us, how we met when we knew, why the sudden wedding. Alexander fielded the questions with practiced ease, weaving a story of whirlwind romance that sounded almost believable when he told it. "I saw her in the office," he'd say, his arm around my waist, pulling me close in a way that would look affectionate to anyone watching. "And I just knew, sometimes you don't need time when you found the right person." Each time he lied, something twisted in my chest. Because the way he said it, with that slight smile and those eyes that crinkled at the corners, he was good at pretending. Really good. And that meant everything between us, every gesture and word, was just another lie in a performance we'd agreed to give. We were standing by the bar, taking a brief respite from the social onslaught, when a woman approached. She was everything I wasn't: tall, willowy, with the kind of bone structure that suggested excellent breeding and better plastic surgery. Her dress probably cost more than my entire new wardrobe. "Alexander," she purred, ignoring me completely. "I heard a rumor you'd gotten married, but I didn't believe it, not after." Well, her smile was sharp. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your little wife?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Vivienne, this is Elena. Elena Vivienne Ashworth." His ex-fiancée, Vivienne finished, her eyes finally sliding to me with undisguised contempt. Before he came to his senses, of course, though it seems he's traded down rather dramatically. I felt the words like physical blows. This was his ex. This perfect, polished woman had been his choice once, and I was what? The downgrade. The placeholder? "Vivienne." Alexander's voice was ice. "You're being rude." "Am I?" She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I'm just surprised, darling, after everything we had, after the life we were building together. This is what you chose. A little mouse who can barely string 2 words together. What happened to your standards?" I wanted to disappear. Wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow me whole. Every insecurity I'd ever had came rushing back with a vengeance. Of course he'd been engaged to someone like her. Of course I was the poor substitute, the convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. "We're done here," Alexander said, his hand finding mine and gripping it almost painfully tight. "Elena, let's go." He was pulling me toward the exit when I found my voice. "No." He stopped, surprised. I turned back to Vivienne, who was watching with a satisfied smirk, and something in me snapped. Maybe it was the weeks of being treated like a doll to be dressed up and posed. Maybe it was the loneliness of living with a man who couldn't even look at me. Maybe it was just 26 years of being called ugly and plain and forgettable finally hitting their limit. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm not sophisticated like you. I didn't grow up with your advantages or your beauty. But you know what? Alexander chose me, not you. And whether you understand it or not, that's what matters." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, half expecting Alexander to stay behind, to apologize to her, to confirm everything she'd said. But then he was beside me, matching my pace, his hand still in mine. We didn't speak in the car. The silence was thick with things unsaid, stretching between us like a chasm. When we reached the penthouse, I headed straight for my wing, desperate to get out of this dress and this performance and this life I'd agreed to. "Elena." His voice stopped me at the hallway. I turned, exhausted and raw and so tired of pretending. "What Vivienne said was true," I finished bitterly. "Don't bother denying it. I'm not stupid. I know exactly what I am in this arrangement, the convenient wife. The problem solved, the bravest woman I've ever met." The words came out quiet but firm, and they stopped my spiral of self-pity cold. He took a step closer, and in the dim light of the hallway his face looked different, softer. "Human, you think I don't know what you gave up," he continued. "What it cost you to agree to this. You could have walked away, stayed proud, stayed struggling, but you swallowed that pride and made a choice to survive. That's not weakness, Elena, that's courage." "It doesn't feel very courageous," I whispered, tears burning behind my eyes. "It feels like I sold myself." "We both did," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. "I sold my freedom to marry for business instead of. Well, we're both prisoners of the choices we've made. The difference is you just proved you're not going to be a passive prisoner. What you said to Vivienne, that was real, that was fire. Don't lose that." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't trade down. Vivienne and I would have destroyed each other. He seemed to struggle with the words, "you're different. Better different, even if you can't see it yet." Then he was gone, disappearing into his wing, leaving me standing in that hallway wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to Alexander Thorne than the cold, calculating businessman I'd agreed to marry. Something shifted between us after that night, subtle but undeniable. Alexander started coming home for dinner, not every night but more than before. He'd sit across from me at the obscenely long dining table and we'd make awkward small talk about our days. I'd tell him about the charity work Caroline had signed me up for, reading programs at local schools, fundraising committees I sat on like a decorative plant. He'd talk about mergers and acquisitions in language that went over my head, but I listened anyway, just grateful for the sound of his voice filling the silence. One evening, about 6 weeks into our marriage, he asked me a question that wasn't about logistics or appearances. "What did you want to be before all this?" I looked up from my pasta, surprised. "What, when you were young? What did you dream about doing with your life?" No one had asked me that in years, maybe ever. I set down my fork thinking. I wanted to be a teacher, elementary school. I loved helping my younger cousins with their homework, seeing that moment when something finally clicks, when they understand something they couldn't before. "Why didn't you?" "Life," I said simply. Mom got sick my sophomore year of college. I dropped out to take care of her, started working to pay for treatment. Then she died and I had all these bills, and teaching requires a degree I never finished. So I did what I could. "Accounting work, it pays the bills," I laughed humorlessly. "Paid the bills, past tense now, I guess." He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if you went back to school to finish your degree? You have time now." "Resources?" He said it casually, like he was suggesting I try a new restaurant, not offering to change my entire life trajectory. "Alexander, I can't just." I didn't know how to finish. Could I? Was that allowed? Was there some clause in our contract that said I had to spend my days being decorative and useless? "The arrangement was that you'd be my wife for appearances," he said, reading my mind. "It says nothing about what you do with your time otherwise. If you want to go back to school, go. If you want to pursue teaching, pursue it. Consider it. Payment for services rendered." It should have felt transactional. Instead, it felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd thought was sealed shut. The possibility of it, of having dreams again, goals beyond just surviving, made my chest ache in a way I couldn't name. "Thank you," I whispered, and he nodded, already turning back to his meal like he hadn't just offered me a piece of my life back. That night, lying in my enormous bed in my beautiful prison, I let myself imagine it. Going back to school, finishing my degree, standing in front of a classroom full of bright-eyed children, helping them discover the world through books and learning. It felt impossible and perfect and terrifying all at once. But it was the first time in years I'd thought about the future and felt something other than dread. That had to mean something. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, impossibly, Alexander and I developed something that almost resembled friendship. He started seeking me out in the evenings, not just for dinner but afterward too. We'd sit in the living room, me curled up on one end of the massive couch with whatever book I was reading, him on the other with his laptop, and exist in the same space without the awkwardness that had defined our early days. Sometimes he'd ask about my book and I'd tell him, surprised he was interested. Sometimes I'd ask about his work and he'd explain things in a way that made the corporate world seem less alien. Small moments, ordinary moments. The kind married couples probably took for granted. He started noticing things about me too. How I took my coffee black, 2 sugars. That I was allergic to shellfish after I'd pushed the shrimp around my plate at a dinner event. That I got a tiny crease between my eyebrows when I was concentrating on reading something difficult. And I noticed things about him. How he rubbed his temples when he had a headache but never complained. The way his accent, usually perfectly neutral, got slightly more pronounced when he was tired, hints of the British boarding schools he'd attended seeping through. That he always sat on the left side of the couch because it gave him a better view of the door. Old habit from his father, who'd been paranoid about security. He wasn't wrong to be, Alexander told me one night after too much wine had loosened his usually controlled tongue. We'd attended another gala, another night of performing our marriage for an audience, and now we were both exhausted and slightly drunk, shoes off, formal wear rumpled. "About security," I prompted, curious. He rarely talked about his family beyond the basics required for social situations. About paranoia, about trust. He swirled the wine in his glass, staring into it like it held answers. "My father built Thorne Enterprises from nothing. Came from poverty, worked his way up, made his fortune through pure determination and ruthlessness. But he never forgot where he came from, never felt safe. He saw betrayal everywhere because he'd had to betray others to get ahead. That sounds exhausting. It was, for him, for everyone around him." A pause, heavy with things unsaid. "He taught me that people always want something from you. That there's no such thing as unconditional care, only transactions waiting to happen. Every relationship is just a negotiation. Is that what you believe? I asked quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something vulnerable flash across his face before he locked it down. I don't know what I believe anymore. The air between us felt charged with possibility and danger. We were treading close to something real, something that went beyond the arrangement we'd agreed to. I should have pulled back, reminded us both that this was temporary, that in a year we'd divorce and go our separate ways. But I didn't. Instead, I did something incredibly stupid. I reached over and took his hand. His fingers were warm, slightly rough at the tips from whatever he did with them. He didn't pull away. For a long moment we just sat there, hands clasped between us, the city lights glittering through the windows like watching stars. "Elena," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had before. Not transactional. Not cold, almost tender. "Yeah, I'm glad it was you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. Of all the people I could have made this arrangement with, I'm glad it was you. My heart did something complicated in my chest. "Me too," I whispered, and meant it more than I'd expected to. He squeezed my hand once, twice, then released it and stood up, putting distance between us with the deliberateness of someone forcing themselves to do the right thing. "It's late. We should both get some sleep." "Alexander, good night, Elena." And he was gone, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the terrifying realization that I was starting to feel things I absolutely should not feel for my temporary, convenient, business arrangement husband. I enrolled in online courses the next week, finishing my bachelor's degree in education. It felt surreal at first, being back in student mode after so many years. The coursework was challenging, forcing me to remember how to study, how to manage deadlines, how to think academically instead of just survive day to day. But it also felt right, like a part of me that had been sleeping was waking up. Alexander noticed. "You seem different," he commented one evening, finding me at the dining table surrounded by textbooks and notes, my laptop open to a video lecture on childhood development theories. "Different how? Alive," he said simply. "You're lit up, excited, it's nice to see." The compliment warmed me from the inside out. "Thank you for making this possible. I didn't realize how much I'd missed learning until I started again." He picked up one of my textbooks, leafing through it with genuine interest. Piaget's Stages of Cognitive Development. "I remember this from my psychology elective at Cambridge." "You took psychology?" "I took a lot of things." A slight smile. "I was trying to figure out what I wanted before my father made it clear I didn't get to want anything except the family business." "Tell me about your paper, the one you were working on when I came in." So I did. I told him about my thesis on literacy development in low-income communities, about the research I was doing, the passion project it had become. And he listened, not politely, not performatively, but genuinely. Asked questions that showed he was engaging with the material, challenged some of my assumptions in ways that made me think harder. We talked for 2 hours, until the coffee I'd made had gone cold and the city outside had settled into its late-night rhythm. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had, the most real. And when he finally stood to go to bed, he paused by my chair. "You're going to be an excellent teacher," he said, and the certainty in his voice made me believe, just for a moment, that he might be right. The 6-month mark of our marriage arrived without fanfare, falling on a random Tuesday in October. I only realized it because Caroline mentioned it in passing while going over my schedule. "The Ashford Anniversary Gala is next week. 6 months married, people will expect to see the happy couple. 6 months, half our arrangement done. In 18 more months, we'd divorce, I'd take my settlement, and Alexander would have satisfied his grandfather's ultimatum. We'd go our separate ways, back to being strangers who'd once shared an address and a last name. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it sat in my stomach like a stone. The gala was the biggest event of the year, Caroline explained. A celebration of Ashford Industries' founding, held at the Thorne family estate in Connecticut, a place Alexander had mentioned exactly never in all our months together. "Do I need to know anything?" I asked, already dreading it. These events were getting easier, but they still exhausted me, all that performing and pretending. "Just the usual," Caroline said. "Though Alexander's grandfather will be there, Charles Thorne, he'll want to meet you properly." The grandfather. The reason for this whole arrangement. I felt my anxiety spike. The day of the gala, we drove out to Connecticut in Alexander's car, the autumn landscape blurring past. He'd been quiet all morning, tension radiating from him in waves I couldn't interpret. "Your grandfather," I finally said, breaking the silence. "What should I expect?" He's formidable, Alexander said carefully. Old school. Traditional, he has very specific ideas about family legacy duty. Will he hate me? He glanced over surprised. Why would he hate you? Because I'm not Vivienne, the name still stung even months later. Because I'm not from the right family or the right background or Elena. He reached over and took my hand, which had become his habit when he wanted me to actually hear him. My grandfather will judge you on your character, not your pedigree. He came from nothing like my father. He values authenticity over appearance. Then he's definitely going to hate me, I muttered. Since our entire marriage is the opposite of authentic. His grip tightened. He doesn't need to know that. The Thorne estate was, I didn't have words, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transported from the English countryside, all stone and ivy and perfectly manicured grounds. Money whispered from every corner, old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Inside, the gala was already in full swing. But unlike the city events I'd gotten used to, this felt different. More intimate somehow, despite the hundreds of guests. These were family friends, business partners of decades, people who knew Alexander not as the CEO but as Charles Thorne's grandson, the heir to a legacy. And then I met Charles himself. He was in his mid-80s, straight-backed despite his age, with eyes the same piercing blue as Alexander's and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. When Alexander introduced us, those eyes swept over me with an intensity that made me feel transparent. "So you're the young woman who finally got my grandson to settle down," he said, his voice gravelly with age but strong. I was beginning to think he was married to that damn company. "Grandfather," Alexander started, but Charles waved him off. "Let me talk to my granddaughter-in-law without you hovering. Go get me a drink, scotch, neat. And take your time about it." It was clearly a dismissal. Alexander looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Charles's expression made him nod and disappear into the crowd. I was left alone with the man who held Alexander's future in his hands. "Walk with me, child," Charles said, and it wasn't a request. We walked slowly through the mansion, Charles pointing out family portraits and telling stories about the people in them. His grandfather who'd immigrated with nothing. His father who'd built the first factory. His own journey from poverty to prominence. Each story was a lesson, I realized, about perseverance and integrity and the weight of legacy. Finally, we ended up in a library that smelled of leather and old books, and Charles settled into a chair with a sigh. "Sit," he commanded, and I did. "You're not what I expected," he said bluntly. When Alexander told me he'd married, I assumed, well, someone more like that Ashworth woman, all polish and no substance. "I'm not very polished," I admitted. "No. But you have something she lacked." He leaned forward, those sharp eyes pinning me in place. "You're genuine, you don't hide what you are, that's rare in our world." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. "My grandson is a good man," Charles continued. "But he's been taught all the wrong lessons. His father, my son, God rest him, he confused success with happiness. Taught Alexander that everything is a transaction, that caring is weakness. Do you know what that does to a person? It makes them lonely," I said softly, thinking of Alexander's admission about trust, about his father's paranoia. "Yes," Charles nodded approvingly, "exactly that. When he called to tell me he'd married you quickly, quietly, I was suspicious. Thought it was another business move, but watching him with you tonight," he smiled, and it transformed his face. "He looks at you like you're real, like you matter." I haven't seen that in his eyes since he was a boy. My heart was beating too fast. "Mr. Thorne, tell me true, child, do you love my grandson?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Did I? I thought about the months we'd spent together, the slow transformation from strangers to something. The way my heart sped up when he came home. How his rare smiles felt like gifts. The conversations that stretched into the early morning. The comfortable silences that spoke louder than words. Oh God, I did. I'd fallen in love with my fake husband and I hadn't even realized it was happening. My voice cracked. "This is complicated." "Love usually is," Charles said gently, "but that's not what I asked. Do you love him?" "Yes," I whispered, the admission tearing out of me. "Yes, I do. But he doesn't, it's not that kind of marriage." Charles laughed, actually laughed, rich and deep. "Oh, child, you think he doesn't feel it too? You think I got to this age without learning to recognize love when I see it, even when the people feeling it are too stubborn or scared to admit it? He's never said, my grandson doesn't know how to say it. He's never had practice, never felt safe enough to try." He leaned back, suddenly looking every one of his 85 years. "His father died when Alexander was 15, suddenly, heart attack. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. It broke something in that boy, made him even more afraid to care because caring means losing. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I don't want to hurt him. Then don't, Charles said simply. Stay, fight for him. Make him see that not everyone leaves, that some things are worth the risk. He stood, creaky but dignified, and patted my shoulder. You're good for him, Elena Thorne. Don't let whatever arrangement you two made keep you from something real. He left me there in that library, surrounded by the weight of family history and my own revelation. I loved Alexander, really, truly loved him. And according to his grandfather, he might love me too, but what did we do about it? We had a contract, an end date, a plan to walk away from each other in a year. How do you navigate falling in love when you've both agreed that love isn't part of the deal? I found Alexander on the terrace, overlooking the gardens lit with strings of lights that made everything look magical. He didn't turn when I approached, just kept staring out at the night. What did my grandfather say to you? A lot of things, I said carefully. Stories about your family. About you, nothing embarrassing, I hope. Alexander, I moved to stand beside him, close enough that our arms almost touched. Why did you really choose me? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer, then. Because you were safe. The words hurt, even though I'd known it was the truth. Safe. You weren't supposed to matter, he said, and now he did turn to look at me, his expression raw in a way I'd never seen. This was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement, 2 years and done, you'd get your freedom, I'd get mine, no complications. And now, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Now it's the opposite of simple, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. You walk into a room and everything gets brighter. You read your books with that little crease between your eyebrows and I forget what I was working on. You talk about teaching with such passion and I find myself wanting to make it happen, wanting to give you every dream you've ever had. You're supposed to be convenient, Elena. Instead, you're everything I can't afford to want. I couldn't breathe. Why can't you afford it? Because people leave, the words exploded out of him. My father died without warning. Vivienne left when my grandfather had his first heart attack, and it looked like the family business might fail. Turns out she loved the Thorne name more than she ever loved me. Everyone leaves, Elena. Everyone finds something more important, something better, and they leave. It's safer to keep people at a distance. Safer to make it a transaction so when it ends, it doesn't destroy you. I'm not everyone, I said, my voice shaking. And maybe if you let me in, really let me in, you'd see that some people stay. He stared at me, and I saw the war happening behind his eyes, the need to protect himself battling against the want I could see written all over his face. This isn't what we agreed to. I know, we have a contract, an end date. I know that too. Then what are you saying? He was close now, so close I could feel the warmth of him, smell his cologne mixing with the autumn air. I'm saying that I fell in love with you, Alexander Thorne, and I hope maybe you feel something for me too. And yes, we have a contract and a plan and this was supposed to be fake. But it doesn't feel fake anymore. Not to me. For a moment he just stared at me and I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Thought he'd pull back, remind me of our arrangement, put that cold mask back in place. But then he was kissing me. His hands came up to cup my face like I was something precious, and his lips were soft and urgent and perfect against mine. I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his neck, and every nerve in my body lit up like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. I'm terrified, he whispered. I don't know how to do this, how to be real with someone. We'll figure it out, I promised, together. Isn't that what married couples do? He laughed, and this time there was joy in it, real joy. I suppose it is, Mrs. Thorne. He kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, and I felt something shift in the universe, like everything had just clicked into place. This was right, we were right. All the money and contracts and arrangements in the world didn't change the simple fact that I loved him and he loved me, and somehow, against all odds, we'd found something real in the middle of our beautiful lie. Everything changed after that night and nothing changed at all. We were still us, still living in the penthouse, still attending events, still navigating the complicated world of Manhattan's elite. But now, when we came home, there was no retreat to separate wings. Now he'd pull me close on the couch while we read. Now we'd cook together on the chef's nights off, making a mess of the pristine kitchen and laughing about our combined incompetence. Now I'd fall asleep in his arms and wake up to kisses pressed to my shoulder, my temple, my lips. Good morning, wife, he'd murmur, and the word meant something different now. Real, chosen. He'd started saying, I love you like he was making up for lost time, dropping it into conversations casually. I love you, do we have more coffee? Or whispering it during quiet moments like he couldn't help himself. Each time my heart would do a little flip, because I'd never get used to hearing it, to knowing he meant it. I finished my degree that winter, and Alexander insisted on celebrating like I'd won the Nobel Prize. He'd rented out an entire restaurant, invited everyone who'd become important to me, Caroline, who'd softened into something like a friend, my study group from online classes, even Madame Dubois, who'd actually smiled and said I'd finally learned to glide. To Elena, Alexander toasted, his eyes on me with such pride and love it made me dizzy, who never let anyone dim her light even when the world tried. You're going to change children's lives, and I'm honored to be the man who gets to support you. I cried, of course. Happy tears this time, surrounded by people who'd become family, held by the man who'd become my home. I started student teaching that spring, working with third graders in a school in Queens, not far from where I'd grown up actually. The kids were brilliant and chaotic and exhausting and perfect, and I loved every challenging minute of it. Alexander would ask about my days with genuine interest, learning my students' names, remembering their stories. When I mentioned that several kids were struggling because they didn't have books at home, he'd quietly donated an entire library to the school. When I worried about one student whose family was facing eviction, suddenly there were resources available, rent assistance programs I'm sure Alexander had funded through some anonymous channel. You're meddling, I'd say, but I was smiling. I'm supporting my wife's passion, he'd correct. There's a difference. He'd started opening up too, telling me about his childhood, his relationship with his father, the pressure of being a thorn. We'd talk late into the night about the things that scared us, the things we wanted, the people we hoped to become. He was seeing a therapist now, working through the trauma and trust issues his father had left him with. She says I have intimacy avoidance rooted in childhood loss, he told me one night, half amused, half serious. Fancy way of saying you were scared to love me, I teased. Terrified, he agreed, pulling me closer. Best decision I ever made though, being terrified with you. The 2-year mark of our marriage approached, the date circled on a calendar somewhere, the end of our original arrangement. We'd never talked about it, never acknowledged that we'd blown past the terms of our contract into something real and permanent. But I knew it was coming. Knew eventually we'd have to address the fact that legally we could dissolve this marriage with no penalties, take our separate paths. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. I wanted to wake up next to Alexander for the rest of my life, wanted to build something real and lasting with him. But I'd learned from our rocky start that assumptions were dangerous. We needed to actually talk about this. I'd planned to bring it up one evening, but Alexander beat me to it. We were having dinner at home, just the two of us, when he set down his fork and reached across the table for my hand. Elena, there's something we need to discuss. My heart sank. Here it was, the end of our arrangement. Maybe he wanted out, wanted to find someone more suitable now that he'd satisfied his grandfather's ultimatum. Maybe I'd been fooling myself thinking this was real for him. 2 years ago, he continued, his thumb rubbing circles on my hand, I made you a proposal that was purely transactional. I offered you money in exchange for playing a role. I treated our marriage as a business arrangement because that's all I knew how to do. Alexander, let me finish. He took a breath. That arrangement is officially over. By the terms of our contract, you're free to leave. I'll honor the settlement we agreed to, plus more if you want it. You've fulfilled your end of the bargain more than adequately. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. This was it. He was letting me go. But before you make any decisions, he said, and now he was moving, coming around the table to kneel beside my chair. I want to ask you something. He pulled a box from his pocket, a small velvet box that made my breath catch. Opening it revealed a ring, not the modest band we'd bought for our original arrangement, but something beautiful and unique. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the kind of ring you choose with care and thought and love. Elena Thorne, he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. Would you marry me again, not for business, not for convenience, but because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone? Because you make me want to be brave. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. Will you stay? Will you choose this, choose us, choose me? I was full-on crying now, ugly happy tears streaming down my face. You idiot, I sobbed. Yes, of course yes, I never wanted to leave. I love you so much and I've been terrified you were going to hold me to the contract and let me go and… He was kissing me, laughing against my lips, sliding the ring onto my finger beside the original band. You really thought I'd let you go? Elena, you're it for me, you're everything. We should probably burn that contract, I suggested when we came up for air. Already did, he admitted. 3 months ago, Caroline witnessed it. She said it was about time. I pulled my head out of my ass, her words, not mine. I laughed through my tears. I really love you, Alexander Thorne. I really love you too, Elena Thorne. He kissed me again, slower this time, deeper. Now and forever, no expiration date. We renewed our vows 6 months later, a real wedding this time with people who actually cared about us. Charles walked me down the aisle, tears streaming down his weathered face. Told you he loved you, he whispered before giving me away. Stubborn boy just needed to figure it out. Caroline was my maid of honor because she'd somehow become the closest thing to family I had left. Alexander's cousin, who turned out to be perfectly decent once he wasn't angling for the company, stood as best man. But the real guests of honor were 23rd graders from my class, who sat in the front rows wearing their finest clothes and watching with wide eyes. They'd helped me plan parts of the ceremony, insisted we needed more flowers and less boring talk, and had voted unanimously that the recessional should be to a pop song, not classical music. Alexander had agreed without hesitation. They're the most important people in your life right now, he'd said. Of course they should be here. As I walked toward him, seeing the love and awe written all over his face, I thought about the girl I'd been 2 years ago. Broken, drowning, convinced she was ugly and forgettable and unworthy of love. And I thought about who I'd become. A teacher, a wife, someone who'd learned that beauty wasn't about how you looked but about how you loved. Alexander had forced me to marry him, yes. It had been a transaction, a business deal, a convenient solution to his problem. But somewhere in the middle of our arrangement, he'd shown me that I was worth more than I'd ever believed. He'd given me not just financial freedom, but the freedom to dream again, to become who I was meant to be. And I'd given him something too, the courage to risk his heart, to believe that not everyone leaves, that love could be permanent and safe and real. You're beautiful, he whispered when I reached him, his eyes shining with unshed tears. So are you, I whispered back. This time when we said our vows, we meant every word. This time when he kissed me, it wasn't for show. It was for us. For the life we were building together, for the love that had grown in the most unlikely soil and bloomed into something neither of us had expected but both of us needed. Later at the reception, Charles gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying simultaneously. I told my grandson he needed to get married. I didn't tell him to fall in love. That wasn't part of the deal. But I'm so glad he did. I'm so glad he found Elena, who loved him enough to let him figure out how to love her back. To the bride and groom, may you always remember that the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. Hear, hear, everyone cheered, glasses raised. Alexander pulled me onto the dance floor, and as we swayed to music chosen by 8-year-olds, he held me close and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For saying yes, both times. For being patient with me while I learned how to do this. For loving me when I didn't know how to love you back. He pulled back to look at me, his hand coming up to cup my face. You saved me, Elena. You gave me something to live for beyond just existing. You saved me too, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. You gave me my life back. You gave me my dreams back. You gave me you. He kissed me there in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by everyone we loved, and I felt complete in a way I never had before. This was happiness. This was home. Not the penthouse or the money or the designer clothes. Just this man, who'd seen past my plain exterior to something worth loving, and who'd let me see past his cold walls to the beautiful, broken, brave heart underneath. 5 years later, I stood in our bedroom, our shared bedroom now in the house we'd bought in Brooklyn, closer to my school, watching Alexander with our daughter. She was 3, all dark curls in his blue eyes, currently insisting that Daddy absolutely had to read one more story, even though it was well past bedtime. He was helplessly wrapped around her tiny finger, just like he was wrapped around mine. "Mommy, tell Daddy he has to read about the dragon again," she demanded, and I laughed. "Daddy has an early meeting, sweetheart. He needs sleep too. But Mommy, I'll make you a deal," Alexander said, using his negotiation skills on a toddler. "One more short book now, and tomorrow night we'll read the long dragon book twice. Do we have an agreement?" She considered this with all the seriousness of a business executive reviewing a contract. "Okay, deal." They shook on it, tiny hand in large one, and I felt my heart expand in that way it did approximately 50 times a day since she'd been born. Our miracle baby, the one the doctors said might not happen because of complications from my mother's genetic condition. But she had happened, against the odds, just like everything good in my life. Later, after she was finally asleep, Alexander found me on the balcony of our bedroom, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "How different life is now. How 7 years ago I was drowning in debt and loneliness, convinced I'd never have anything good. And now I have everything, you, her, my teaching, this life we built together. Sometimes it still doesn't feel real. It's real, he promised, turning me to face him, and you deserve every bit of it. You always did, you just needed someone to help you see it. We helped each other see it, I corrected. You were drowning too, just in a different way. Fair point. He smiled, that smile that was reserved just for me and our daughter, the one that transformed his whole face. Thank you, by the way. For what? For taking a chance on me, for saying yes when I offered you that ridiculous arrangement, for being brave enough to fall in love even when neither of us was supposed to. I reached up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of 7 years of love. Best business decision I ever made, he laughed against my lips. Worst business decision I ever made, best life decision though. And really, that was it exactly. What had started as a cold transaction had become the warmest, most real thing in both our lives. He'd forced the ugly girl to marry him, except I'd never been ugly, just unseen. And he'd showered me with love and luxury, except the luxury had never mattered as much as the love. We'd both been broken when we found each other, both convinced we were unworthy of real connection. But somehow, in the middle of our arrangement, our performance, our beautiful lie, we'd found something true. We'd found each other. And we'd built a life that was worth more than any contract could ever capture. A life full of late-night conversations and early morning kisses, of laughter and tears, and the everyday magic of being loved exactly as you are. 10 years after that night on the balcony, I watched Alexander from across our daughter's college graduation. She was 18 now, brilliant and beautiful, and so much like her father it made me laugh. She'd gotten into Harvard, Alexander's alma mater, and was planning to study education and business, determined to revolutionize how schools were funded and operated. Our son, who was 10 and currently fidgeting in his seat beside his father, wanted to be a teacher too, specifically of math, because math is like puzzles, Mom, and everyone deserves to know how to solve puzzles. Caroline, who'd officially retired last year but still showed up for family dinners weekly, was crying openly. I remember when you two couldn't stand to be in the same room, she said to me, dabbing at her eyes. Now look at you, a whole family, a whole beautiful life. You helped build it, I reminded her. You believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Someone had to, she said with a watery laugh. Charles had passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in his sleep at 91. But before he went, he'd told both of us how proud he was. You found real love, he'd said, his voice weak but certain. You took a chance, that's all I ever wanted for you. We'd named our son Charles in his honor. Now, watching our daughter accept her diploma, I felt Alexander's hand find mine, the way it always did during big moments. His wedding ring, matching the one I'd chosen for him during our real wedding, caught the light. Can you believe we made her? He whispered. We made both of them, I whispered back. Pretty miraculous for a fake marriage. Best fake marriage in history, he agreed, then turned to kiss my temple. Though I prefer to call it a practice marriage, had to try it out first before we did it for real. I laughed, because he'd been making that joke for 17 years now and it never got old. Nothing about us got old. We still talked for hours, still discovered new things about each other, still fell more in love with every passing year. After the ceremony, we took our family photo, all 4 of us plus Caroline, and I thought about that girl on the balcony, terrified and desperate, agreeing to marry a stranger for money. If I could go back and tell her what was waiting, would I even believe it? A husband who loved her completely, 2 children who were the best of both of them, a career she was passionate about, a life rich in the ways that actually mattered. Mom, you're crying, my daughter said, concerned. Happy tears, I assured her, just thinking about how grateful I am. That's gross, my son announced. You cry at everything. She does, Alexander agreed, ruffling our son's hair. But that's because she has a big heart. It's one of my favorite things about her. Gross, my son repeated, but he was grinning. That night back home, Alexander and I sat on our porch swing, the one he'd installed because I'd mentioned once that I'd always wanted one, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolors. 17 years, I said softly, feels like yesterday and forever ago simultaneously. Any regrets? He asked, though I knew he was teasing. Just one, I said seriously. He stiffened, concerned, until I continued. I wish I'd kissed you that first night, would have saved us some time. He relaxed with a laugh. We got there eventually, that's what matters. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd said no? If I'd walked away that night at the gala? Every day, he admitted. And every day I'm grateful you were brave enough to say yes. You saved my life, Elena. You taught me that love isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing we're capable of. You taught me I was worth loving, I countered. That I wasn't ugly or forgettable or less than. You saw me when no one else did. I always saw you, he said softly. From that first moment you ran into me and spilled coffee everywhere. You looked at me like I was just a person, not a name or a bank account. It terrified me. That's why I chose you, not because you were safe, but because you were dangerous. You made me feel things I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Look how that turned out, I teased. Pretty damn well, I'd say. He pulled me closer and we rocked gently, the way we'd been doing for years now, the rhythm of our life together. I love you, Elena Thorne, today, tomorrow, forever. No contract needed. I love you too, Alexander Thorne, my fake husband who became my real everything. He kissed me as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And I thought about fairy tales, the ones I'd stopped believing in as a child, convinced they weren't for girls like me. But maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe fairy tales could be real. Maybe you could marry a stranger and fall in love. Maybe you could start as an ugly duckling and discover you were beautiful all along. Maybe you could build something true from a foundation of lies. Maybe, just maybe, love could find you in the most unexpected places, in a forced marriage, in a business transaction, in the eyes of a man who learned to see you as you really were and loved what he found. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best kind of fairy tale of all. The one you never saw coming, the one that saved you both. The one that proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with the words, "I need you to marry me," and end with "forever." The ugly girl and the cold businessman had found each other in the middle of their brokenness and built something beautiful, a family. A life, a love that would last until the end of time. And if that wasn't a fairy tale worth telling, I didn't know what was.